Welcome to the chapter, The Natural Releams of the Earth.
This slide presents the overview of the chapter. Learning objectives. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to
explain the 4 different realms of Earth, describe about the jigsaw puzzle and the moving plates, explain about the slow movements and sudden movements on the lithosphere, describe about the external processes of lithosphere, interpret how air and water transform the surface of the Earth, explain the work of water, waves, wind, glaciers on the lithosphere. Describe the action of vegetation and human beings on Earth.
Introduction. Before entering into the chapter, follow the instructions shown on the screen.
We know that the word releams means areas which have some common features. In earlier classes, we have studied the basics of 4 natural releams of the Earth, that is, lithosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere in brief. Do you know how biosphere is formed? How the various landforms are formed? What are the internal and external features of the land? How the air and water transform the surface of the Earth? In this chapter, let us find out the answers to the questions. Let us look at some of the broad features of the 4 natural realms of the Earth in brief and study about lithosphere in detail. Let us first have a brief introduction of lithosphere. The lithosphere, derived from Greek words litho, stone, and spira, sphere, is the hard shell of the Earth consisting of the crust and the topmost part of the upper mantle with an average thickness of 100 kilometers. Further, crust is divided into oceanic crust and continental crust, which includes mountains, plateaus, low plains, deep valleys, and oceans. It contains the minerals, rocks, and soils that humans use for building materials, making metals, and for agriculture. The prime functions of lithosphere are: it supports all the life forms on the Earth. It is a rich source of minerals. These minerals help in making many useful products. It is a major source of fuels such as coal, petrol, etc. Now, let us look at hydrosphere. The hydrosphere, derived from Greek words hydr, water, and spira, sphere, contains all the solid, liquid, and gaseous water of the planet. It ranges from 10 to 20 kilometers in thickness. It includes the oceans, seas, lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. The hydrosphere covers about 70% of the surface of the Earth and is the home for aquatic life. There are some water resources found deep in the earth in the gaps between rocks, groundwater or mineral water. Now, let us look at atmosphere. Atmosphere, derived from Greek words atmos, vapor, and spira, sphere, is a layer of gases surrounding our planet with oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, etc., and also dust particles. The layers of Earth's atmosphere are divided and subdivided by variations in height, pressure, temperature, electrical properties, and lapse rate. The atmospheric layers include the troposphere 0 to 18 kilometers, stratosphere 18 to 50 kilometers, mesosphere 50 to 90 kilometers, thermosphere 90 to 300 kilometers. Now let us look at biosphere. Biosphere, derived from Greek words bio, life, and spira, sphere, is composed of all living things on Earth and the physical environment that supports them. It is made up of three parts, namely atmosphere, air, hydrosphere, water, lithosphere, rock and sediments. Now let us study about lithosphere. Landforms are natural features of landscape, natural physical features of the Earth's surface, for example, plateaus, mountains, plains, hills, loess and glaciers, etc. The crust of Earth is uneven, consisting oceans and continents. The oceans and continents are called first-order landforms. Mountains, plains, and plateaus which were formed by internal movements of Earth are called as second-order landforms. Now, let us perform an activity of identifying the continents and oceans. Fill up this empty map of the world by dragging and dropping the names of the continents and oceans.
Knowledge.
We will now look into the topic, the jigsaw puzzle and the moving plates. While looking at the world map, have you ever noticed that the continents look like pieces of puzzle? If they're moved closer together across the Atlantic Ocean, they would fit neatly to form a giant landmass. Scientists propose that in the beginning of all the continents were held together, but later they broke up and gradually drifted just like pieces of large jigsaw puzzle and came to their present places. Geologists have concluded that all the continents and oceans are actually located on massive surface of rocks called plates. There are 6 major plates and many minor plates on the Earth. The 6 major plates are African, North American, South American, Indo-Australian, Antarctic, Eurasian, and Pacific plates. The minor plates are Nazca and Arabian plates. These plates float on mantle. Earth movements, that is, forces operating inside the Earth's crust, cause these plates to move away from each other or move towards each other. Plate tectonics is the theory which explains how the pieces of Earth's surface, that is, the plates, move. This theory states that the Earth's crust is broken into several pieces called plates that move over a layer of hot magma, molten rock, in the mantle layer of the Earth. Note: the word tectonic is derived from the Greek word tekton, which means builder, which in turn was derived from Sanskrit word takshan, which also means builder. As the plates move and push each other, a lot of pressure is exerted, leading to many changes. Due to the huge pressure, one plate gets pushed under into the mantle, whereas the other plate gets pushed up, causing formation of chain of mountains. These movements also cause volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. But do you know why these plates are pushed? What is the reason? Now, let us know the reasons for movement of plates in detail by looking at the theory called sea floor spreading. Geologists found that there are mid-ocean ranges or ridges under the oceans like Pacific Ocean. These ocean ridges are a result of lava erupting from the mantle. These eruptions on the ocean ridges develop new ocean floor that is made up of basalt rocks. Later, the ocean floor spreads laterally from the ridge. This is the reason the mid-ocean ranges contain the newest crust formed on the planet. This newest crust is then slowly pulled away from the ridge and thus the ocean basin gets widened. This results in the process of sea floor spreading. Now, let us look at the actions which take place at the margins of the plates. Just like the formation of sea floor spreading, along with the mid-ocean ridges, the incoming plate goes under the static plate. The margins of the plates where they meet. Finally, the incoming plate goes into the mantle of the earth and becomes molten due to the heat. Further, the rest of the plate is also pulled with it. In this process, it also pulls the newly formed seafloor near the ocean ridges. Example, the formation of Himalayan mountains is due to the process of the Indian plate pushing into the Eurasian plate.
Knowledge.
Now, let us learn about the slow and sudden movements on the lithosphere. As we have learned, there are two kinds of changes in the Earth's lithosphere. Slow movements that lead to the formation of crust, continental plates, etc. Sudden movements like volcanoes and earthquakes that lead to the destructions and huge changes in the landforms. Let us learn about volcanoes in detail. A volcano is a mountain that opens into the atmosphere to a pool of molten rock below the surface of the earth. When pressure builds up under the surface of earth, this molten rock erupts from the mountain. Volcanoes are formed due to high temperature of the earth's interior. Molten form of lower crust and mantle is called magma. When volcanoes erupt, molten material along with steam, smoke and various gases rise from the interior of earth into the atmosphere. Note, the term volcano came from the volcano island which had been named after Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. The smoke, dust and ash from the volcano spread out in the air, whereas the molten material gets cooled on the earth and forms hard rocks called igneous rocks. Intrusive igneous landforms are formed under the surface of earth due to the cooling of magma beneath the surface. By the erosion of rock over these, the intrusive landforms are exposed. The lava cooled on the surface of earth forms the extrusive landform. Lava plateaus. These landforms are formed by the lava that is oozing onto the surface of the earth, not only from the volcanoes but also from the fissures on the earth's surface. Now, let us look at some of the important facts of volcanoes. The term magma is defined as the liquid rock inside a volcano. Lava is liquid rock magma that flows out of a volcano. There are 4 different types of volcanoes, namely cinder cones, composite volcanoes, shield volcanoes, lava volcanoes. Cinder cones are circular or oval cones made up of small portions of lava. Composite volcanoes are steep-sided volcanoes composed of many layers of volcanic rocks. Shield volcanoes are volcanoes shaped like a bowl or shield in the middle with long, gentle slopes. Lava domes are formed when erupting lava is too thick to flow and makes a steep-sided mound. The below table gives the details of the world's most important volcanoes. Now, let us know what is Pacific Ring of Fire. The Pacific Ring of Fire, or just the Ring of Fire, is an area where large numbers of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occur in the basin of the Pacific Ocean. High number of earthquakes and volcanoes occurs around the ridge of the Pacific Ocean basin called Pacific Rim. The Pacific Rim covers the western shores of North America and South America, Australia, Eastern Asia, and the Pacific Islands.
Knowledge.
Now, let us look at the external processes in detail. In addition to internal processes, external processes like the action of wind and air contribute a lot in the diversity of the landform. The external process is how air and water work on the surface and how the diverse landforms are formed. The external processes wear away the surface of rocks and mountains, transport the worn out particles and deposit them in low islands and basins. Geographers propose that the landforms that are shaped by constant wind and water are called as third-order landforms. These landforms are the result of various processes like weather, erosion, transportation, and deposition. This overall continuous process is called as denudation process. Geomorphic cycle, also called geographic cycle or cycle of erosion, is the theory of evolution of landforms. This theory was first set forth by William M. Davis between 1884 and 1934. This theory states that the varied landforms like mountains, plateaus, plains keep on changing at a very slow rate through a process known as geomorphic cycle. Now, let us look at how air and water transform the surface of the earth. The formation of rocks is a result of molten material coming out from the mantle of the earth. Later, over the millions of years, these got shaped into valleys, plains, mountains, and plateaus, etc. There exist many processes like weathering, erosion, transportation, deposition in the breaking, carrying, and deposition of primary rocks. Weathering, erosion, transportation, deposition. Click each tab to know more. Weathering. Weathering includes the methods or processes which weaken and break the rocks. Weathering breaks down and loosens the surface minerals of rock so that they can be transported away by agents of erosion such as water, wind, and ice. The atmospheric force and weather force causes breakdown of rocks. The rocks expand in heat and contract when cooled during day and night. This process happens through the years in summer and winter seasons. The process of expansion and contraction and the presence of water and moisture in the air makes the rocks brittle and break down. Erosion. The process of moving soil and cutting rock by water or air on the surface of the earth is called erosion. Water, which flows with great speed, and wind with great force, causes the breaking of rocks and transportation of soil. Water acts in the form of river, sea waves, glaciers, etc., whereas wind takes many forms like storms, steady winds, etc. Transportation. Material that has been loosened by erosion may be then transported along the river. Transportation is the process where the eroded material like small rock, gravel, mud, soil are carried by wind and water. The rivers and waves cut rocks and transport them from one place to another. Deposition. The river and wind, after they slow down, lose the force to carry the material and thus they deposit the materials. These dumped debris finally form plains and river basins. Note: sedimentary rocks are types of rock that are formed by the deposition of material from the earth's surface and within bodies of water.
Knowledge.
Now, let us see the action of water on the lithosphere. Flowing water in streams and rivers across the land in sheets is the erosional process in shaping Earth's landscape. Streams and rivers are able to create both erosional landforms such as own channels, canyons and valleys, and depositional landforms like floodplains, alluvial fans and deltas as they flow over Earth's surface. River flows down from its source in the mountains, and as it descends the steep slopes, it follows with great force and cuts the mountains vertically, thus creating a V-shaped valley. The V-shaped valleys are generally narrow at the bottom and wide at the top. When the rivers cut the harder rocks, a very narrow valley with steep sides are formed. These are called as gorges. Example: Zanskar Gorge in Kashmir. A canyon is a deep, narrow valley with steep sides. Canyon comes from the Spanish word canon, which means tube or pipe. The term gorge is often used to mean canyon, but a gorge is almost always steeper and narrower than a canyon. Note: the biggest canyon in the world is on River Colorado, Arizona, USA. The Grand Canyon is 466 kilometers in length. Its depth is 1.6 kilometers and width is 188 meters to 29 kilometers. The waterfall with great force dig deep into the rocks and form a pool called as a plunge pool. The floodplains like Ganga Plain and Krishna Godavari plains are formed due to the movement of the rivers. The speed of the river gets reduced when it enters a plain, and thus it does not have the force to carry heavy particles and hence deposits them on the banks. The river during floods cut down the soil and produces silt, whereas the river without floods deposits silt. With the repetition of the process, the height of the river bed increases with deposition, and when the flood water comes again, it changes its course and cuts a new path. As a result, river constantly changes its course into the floodplain to form meanders, turns like a snake, and later oxbow lakes. An oxbow lake is a U-shaped body of water that forms when a wide meander from the main stem of the river is cut off, creating a free-standing body of water. Deltas, word originated from Greek alphabet delta, are wetlands that form as rivers empty their water and sediment into another body of water, such as an ocean, lake, or another river. Now, let us see the action of glaciers on the lithosphere. Glaciers aren't just big pieces of ice but froze overnight. They are actually slow-moving rivers of ice. The formation of a glacier takes a lot of time. The snowfall in the very cold regions like Himalayas gets accumulated as ice and then flows down to warm areas and gets melted, thus resulting in the formation of rivers. Example, the birth of river Ganga starts from the Gangotri glacier in the Himalayas. Note, the Sundarbans in West Bengal, India are a part of world's largest delta formed by the mighty rivers Ganges, Brahmaputra and Meghna. The movement of glacier is generally due to the force of gravity. The glacier moves very slowly, that is, a few centimeters a day. There are two fundamental areas in every glacier. They are accumulation area, the area where the snow that falls in winter is preserved during the hot season. Ablation area, the area where the melting of the snow takes place, that is, accumulated during the winter season. The U-shaped valleys which we generally observe are a result of the glacier erosion. Glacious erosion includes two main processes, namely plucking and abrasion. Plucking is defined as the erosion and transport of large chunks of rocks. When the glacier moves over a landscape, the glacier melts and the water seeps into cracks within the underlying bedrock. Glacier abrasion refers to the ability of debris-rich glacier ice to act like a sheet of sandpaper as it moves over underlying surfaces. After the glacier melts and becomes water, it does not have enough force to carry the rocks, thus leaving them behind in the form of huge rugged boulders. The glacier collects pebbles, cobbles, sand, etc. from the mountainous slopes, valleys, and leaves them on the bed of the glacier. All this debris is called as tilt. Moraine is the tilt which gets deposited at various parts of the glacier as the glacier cannot carry it. Now let us perform an activity on the world's highest waterfalls. Select suitable answer from group B for group A and drop it in the bracket provided against A.
Knowledge.
Now, let us see the impact of water on the lithosphere. Waves are mainly a product of the wind. It's the first step in the formation of surfaceable waves. Wind interaction on the surface of the ocean far from the coast can create some of the best waves on earth. The coastal landforms are formed due to the erosion and deposition by the sea waves. The waves flow continuously and strike at the rocks, resulting the formation of hollow-like caves. Over time, the erosion causes the cave to break through the headland, creating an arc. Eventually, the top of the arc will collapse due to gravity and a lack of support. This creates a stack. The steep rocky coast rising almost vertically above seawater is called as sea cliff. Over time, with further weathering, the sea cliffs transform into capes and bays. A cape is a headland cutting out into a sea. A bay is a wide-mouthed recess in the line of coast. The deposit sediments of the waves along the shores form beaches. Now, let us see the influence of wind on the lithosphere. Winds in the desert are often extreme and unrestricted by trees and vegetation. Deserts constitute for about 1/5 of Earth's land. They are rocky, stony, and sandy. The strong winds act as abrasive sandpaper as they carry sand, soil, and erode the hard rock. Especially in the desert regions, the wind creates many interesting erosions and depositions. Mushroom rock. It is also called as rock pedestal or a pedestal rock. These rocks are formed by the processes of erosion and weathering. These are named as mushroom rocks since they look like mushrooms. These rocks have narrow bottom and wider top as the wind cuts lower section of the rocks more than the upper part. Inselberg. Inselberg is a German word where Insel means island and Berg means mountain. Inselbergs represent characteristic rock outcrops which rise suddenly above a plain, hilly country, or rainforests. The isolated hills rising equally from the ground are called Inselberg or Island Mountain. Sand dunes. 1/4 to 1/3 of the world's deserts are covered with sand. A sand dune is an accumulation of sand formed by the wind, by waves, and by eroding sandstone. Their structure constantly changes since they are dependent on the ever-constant forces of wind and water. Sand dunes act as a natural barrier against storms and waves, protecting houses and cottages that may be inland. Loess is a geologically recent deposit of silt or material which is usually yellowish or brown in color and consisting of tiny mineral particles brought by wind by the places where they now lie. They are rich in lime, arc form, and coherent. Loess plains are plains formed by the deposition of loess. Now, let us see the action of vegetation and human beings. Action of vegetation and human beings on the lithosphere in simple terms mean the impact of biosphere on lithosphere. Humans are now responsible for causing changes in the environment that hurt animals and plant species. Vegetation like trees, plants, grass, etc. helps in the weathering of rocks. Weathering causes the disintegration of rock on the surface of the earth. Plants and animal life, atmosphere and water are the major causes of weathering. Weathering breaks down and loosens the surface minerals of rock so they can be transported away by agents of erosion such as water, wind and ice. When the roots of plants drive into the rocks, fine cracks, holes are formed on the rocks which help the water to seep into the rocks. Moreover, the plants and grass layers on the soil helps in the prevention of soil erosion. We, the humans, also play a major role in the transformation of the crust. Note: in geology, denudation is the long-term sum of processes that cause the wearing away of the Earth's surface, leading to a reduction in elevation and relief of landforms and landscapes.
Knowledge.
Let us now perform an activity on identifying the first order and second order landforms. Look at the following landforms and categorize them into first or second order landforms by selecting appropriate option.
Keywords. List of keywords are shown on the screen. Summary. Let us recap the highlights of this chapter.
The lithosphere, derived from Greek words litho, stone, and spira, sphere, is the hard shell of the earth consisting of the crust and the topmost part of the upper mantle with an average thickness of 100 kilometers. The hydrosphere, derived from Greek words hydro, water, and spira, sphere, contains all the solid, liquid, and gaseous water of the planet. It ranges from 10 to 20 kilometers in thickness. Atmosphere, derived from Greek words atmos, vapor, and spira, sphere, is a layer of gases like oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, etc., and also dust particles surrounding our planet. Biosphere, derived from Greek words bio, life, and spira, sphere, is composed of all living things on the earth and the physical environment that supports them. The crust of earth is uneven, filled with oceans and continents. The oceans and continents are called first order landforms. Mountains, plains and plateaus which were formed by internal process of earth are called second order landforms. Plate tectonics is the theory which explains how the pieces of earth's surface, that is the plates, move. A volcano is a mountain that opens downward to a pool of molten rock below the surface of the earth. When pressure builds up, eruptions occur. Volcanoes are formed due to high temperature of Earth's interior. The Pacific Ring of the Fire, or just the Ring of Fire, is an area where large number of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occur in the basin of the Pacific Ocean. The external process is how air and water work on the surface and how the diversities of landforms are formed. Geomorphic cycle, also called geographic cycle or cycle of erosion, is the theory of the evolution of landforms. This theory was first set forth by William M. Davis between 1884 and 1934. When the rivers cut harder rocks, very narrow valleys with steep sides are formed. These are called gorges. A canyon is a deep, narrow valley with steep sides. Canyon is derived from the Spanish word canon, which means tube or pipe. The waterfall with great force dig deep hole into the rocks and form a pool called a plunge pool. Glaciers aren't just big pieces of ice that froze overnight. They are actually slow-moving rivers of ice. The formation of glacier takes a lot of time. Waves are mainly a product of the wind. It's the first step in the formation of surfable waves. The isolated tilts rising equally from the ground are called Inselberg or Eyeline Mountain. A sand dune is an accumulation of sand formed by the wind, by waves, and by eroding sandstone. Loess is a geologically recent deposit of silt or material which is usually yellowish or brown in color and consisting of tiny mineral particles brought by wind to the places where they presently lie.
Read the question. Follow-up work.
Collect newspapers or magazine articles on earthquakes and volcanoes. Prepare an illustrated file on how they occur and affect human life. If we observe, many of the scientific names are taken from Greek language. What do you think is the reason? Locate the Himalayas, Andes, and Rockies mountains. Why were they formed in those locations? Suggest reasons.
Test your understanding of the chapter by taking.
You have successfully completed the chapter The Natural Releams of the Earth.